techniques. These were sanded through the drum sander at school to 150. We're going to sand it to 180, then we're going to go from 180 to 220. Now, personally myself, I like to sand to 320, but just for the sake of time and what we've done in class, we will stop at 220. The whole idea when you're sanding is you want to remove the sanding grit from the previous sanding. So when it comes out of the drum sander, there's going to be visible marks still. You're trying to minimize all these sanding marks to where when you put color and or finish on it, you don't see the sanding marks. So that's what we're going to do now. So we have our alder. We're going to go through and sand the edges and give those a slight round over. Sand the end grain and the edge as well. And the one thing I did before I even started sanding is I washed my hands to make sure my hands are clean. It's really important that you don't transfer dirt or oil from your skin onto what it is you're trying to finish. I'm just going to hold this down, sand it with the grain. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that, but I'm going to anyways. Very important, you sand with the grain. If you sand cross grain, you're going to see those scratch marks. Now, if you're trying to distress something, and we will do that in another episode, we will talk about cross grain sanding and cross grain marks. But for today's session, we are sanding with the grain. So we sanded to 180, now we're going to go to 220. On all the edges again as well. $220, now we're ready. Our next step, we're going to raise the grain and let it dry. Then we're going to apply our dye color. Okay, we've raised the grain on our alder. Now we're going to sand it with the last sanding that we did, which was 220. You don't want to over sand this. Basically what you're trying to do is knock down those wood fibers that stood up like whiskers, and you want to just knock those down to where when we put our water-based dye on it, it's not going to raise the grain nearly as much. So here we go, very gently, just sort of kiss that surface. You can see I'm not putting very much pressure on this at all. Our next step is sanding. After you put on your sealer coat, and the one we used was from the Deft company called Lacquer Sanding Sealer. So what's the difference between the sanding sealer and the gloss lacquer? Sanding sealer is made, they put something called zinc stearate in it. And zinc stearate is a soap-like substance that makes it easier to sand between coats. So a lot of people may think, well, if one coat of sealer is good, then 2 or 3 have to be even better. Well, that's not really true, because those zinc stearates can make the top finish coats softer, because that zinc stearate causes the sealer coat not to dry very hard. So you want to put one coat, move on to your finish coats after that. So that's what we're going to do next, but first we need to sand this very gently. You don't want to lean on the sandpaper like this because you don't want to burn through this edge. It's very easy to burn through that color. So I usually roll my fingers away from that edge, very gently and quickly hit that. And on the face of it, now this piece of sandpaper I'm using is a very worn out piece of 320. It's no longer good for sanding the bare wood, but it's perfect for sanding between clear coats of finish. If you were to use a brand new piece of 320, it would be too aggressive, could cut through the finish very easily, the sealer coat, and cut into your color, and you don't want to do that. You're just trying to knock those little whiskers down that raised up after the sealer coat.